Hey there, how's it going? In this video, I'm going to show you guys how I prepare hollowed models for resin printing. I think the best way to do that is to run through a few examples, and that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. Before I get into that, I kind of wanted to mention a few things to kind of give you a little bit more context. Most of the models I'm going to be showing you are going to be from the company One Page Rules. On this channel, I've been posting monthly battle reports for them for about 2 years, and I've been printing their stuff for maybe closer to 3 years. So I have a pretty good understanding of their range, and honestly, I really haven't printed much outside of their range. I just wanted to clarify that this video is not meant to single out one-page rules. It just happens to be what I print the most of, and that I have the most examples to give you guys. And I also feel like most of my audience is printing these models. I do have a few examples from other companies that I think are relevant to this video, and I'll be including them as well. A lot of the examples I'm going to show are already pre-supported, but I've had to do work on the file to get it to where I want it to be. One thing I want to really stress, especially if you're new to 3D printing, is that if a model says that it's pre-supported, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just pop it into a slicer, slice it, and start printing. You still have to check it and make sure everything is done correctly. A lot of the larger subscription-based companies, they're on a very tight schedule, and it's just like go, 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 getting these models out month after month. And there's so much involved in that process. When it comes to the hollowing and the supports, that stuff is kind of more on the back end, and it's not as visible. There aren't as many eyes on it. And because of that, if maybe the hollowing wasn't done the best way or the supports aren't quite there, that kind of stuff can kind of slip through the cracks, which again is why you should always double check this stuff and make sure that you know that it's going to be printing properly. And again, I'm not trying to pick on one-page rules here. I'm sure that all of the companies that do subscription services are like this. I just haven't actually looked at their files. I will say they've gotten better and better over time. My goal here is to help you guys get successful prints that you won't have issues with down the road. And one last thing I wanted to talk about was the dangers of 3D printing. If you're new to this, hopefully you know that resin is corrosive and you should take all of the proper precautions when you're using it. I do have a brief video that I put together for my patrons, if you're interested in that, that shows how I post-process my prints, washing and curing. I'm going to talk a bit about that in this video, but I'm not going to be showing actual footage of me doing it. So this video is going to be a lot more about setting up the files. About a year and a half ago, I did a video on the resin that I've been using, and that's Anycubic's water washable ABS-like resin V2. I still use that resin. I do want to do a follow-up video and go into a lot more detail on that resin and my experience with it. If you're interested, be on the lookout for that. If you are a home printer, I highly recommend checking out water washable resin. For the purposes of this video, I wanted to mention that each resin has unique properties, and those properties will affect the supports. The strength and flexibility of the resin will kind of dictate how many supports that it needs. Once you've printed a few things out, you kind of get a sense of how that resin performs and whether or not it needs more support. If you're trying out a new resin, it's better to err on the side of caution and just add extra supports. And then once you have a better idea of how that resin performs, you can kind of go from there. If you feel like you don't need as many supports the next time, maybe you don't add as many. It also affects the washing process because water washing versus IPA washing is not quite the same, mainly due to the difference in surface tension between the two. If you have smaller holes, like 3 millimeters or smaller, the surface tension is really going to keep the water from getting through that hole. Alcohol does a better job with that, but it stinks so bad, and it is flammable. I have been using nanobulbs mainly to cure the interiors of my models. The only things smaller than that are fiber optic cables, and I haven't really had much success using those. So I stick to nanobulbs. The one that I use is, I believe, 3 millimeters wide, but then the base is closer to 4 millimeters wide, and then the actual cable, since it's wrapped with tape, it's about 5 millimeters wide. So that means that any hole that I'm sticking that through needs to be at least 6 millimeters wide. Because ideally, you never want that cable to touch any of the resin that's uncured, because you're not going to be able to cure the resin as easily once it's on the cable. So originally when I started doing this, I was just buying nanobulbs separately and then just attaching them to a battery. One thing I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about is the power of the battery. Most people I see using 9-volt batteries. The more powerful the battery is, the stronger the beam is going to be. My biggest issue with batteries is that they die over time. And because of that, you get a gradual decline in the strength of the light. That's why I prefer this plug-in model that I bought on Etsy. Since it plugs in, it has a consistent voltage, and it's nice and strong. It's pretty comparable to the 9-volt battery. You can see it's a little bit stronger. The 9-volt battery will work, but if I ever have a chance to buy the plug-in version of something over something that's battery powered, I always go with the plug-in version because I like to have that consistent power. I just don't really like having to deal with batteries. Either one will work pretty well for you, but I prefer the plug-in version. Also, another thing nobody ever really talks about is how narrow the beam of light is on these bulbs. Think of that beam as the sweet spot for optimal curing. When you're curing the inside of the model, you want to be able to focus that narrow beam on every surface of the model for at least a few seconds. If that isn't possible, one thing I do is I'll add some water to help reflect the light. As far as software that I use the free version of Lychee Slicer, so I'm not going to be getting into any of the pro features. I personally don't think you need them for this type of work. There are a lot of great features in the pro paid version of Lychee Slicer. I just personally don't feel like it provides enough value to justify me paying $10 a month for it. I wish more companies would go back to the pay once and you're done model. Like if they would offer a lifetime license for like $60, I would buy it today. All right, time to get to some examples. So, in my opinion, the most important question you want to ask yourself is how will I cure the internal geometry of this model? For the sake of this video, I'm going to at least assume that you're using the nanobulbs to cure. Example one, this is the body of an artillery beast by One Page Rules. So, the first thing that I usually do is just get a quick look at the internal geometry of the model to try and see if there's a few obvious spots to add some larger holes. So the issue with this model is that these holes are way too small. These are only 5 millimeters wide, and like I said before, I need it to be at least 6 millimeters wide, and that doesn't mean that that's what every hole should be. Every hole should be as big as possible, in my opinion. This one down here's 5, up here 5 again. There's one over here that's also 5. So the first thing that I do is start looking at the inside of the model, and I work from the bottom up. You can pretty much just get rid of all of these. And one spot that I've found that's consistently good for adding holes is where these key spots are. These are the spots where you connect two pieces. So we'll start down here at the bottom. This is the first spot that I want to look at. I'm going to put a hole on the back side of that. I'm going to widen that as much as I possibly can. I don't want it to go into the sides. I just want it to flatten out that nub as much as possible. Something like that. The penetration is pretty good for where it's at. Then I'll just scroll through that, make sure everything's looking okay, make sure there's no islands. It's looking good. And you see that's going to give us a much wider hole. And while we're down here, that's going to be the primary hole for this section. You can add smaller holes just to kind of help with drainage, but you need to have those holes for curing as well. And that's one thing that I just consistently do not see in these models. I think there was a hole here before. That's a good spot. These don't need to be any deeper than the actual wall. So we can take that down to like 4. That's good. Put another one over here. That looks pretty good. Move up to the next one. You can see there's a spot right here. Um, you got to watch out for spots like this that might be tricky to get light into. This to me doesn't look like it needs to be supported, so I'm going to delete these supports. This one I'll keep in, even though I think you'd probably be okay getting rid of it, but I'll keep that in because it's not going to block as much. The thing with internal supports is that they're going to block the lights and keep anything back here from curing as well. So another rule that I have is to try and use as few internal supports as possible. It really just makes me cringe when I see a model that's just absolutely filled with internal supports. Like that's just one of the cardinal sins to me. Going up here a little further, you can see there's another one here. Same thing, I'm just going to make that as big as I can. You don't want it to go into the sides of the model. Just make it a little deeper, and that's looking good. Same thing over here. Same thing over here. This one's a little bigger. Now here you can see there's a bunch of supports. We're just going to ignore those for now. I want to get my holes in place and then see which supports I can get rid of, which supports I can move around. Up here at the top, it's getting a little trickier. There's a lot of congestion, a lot of spots kind of connected and very close to each other. Again, we just want to make sure that it's not going into the wall. See right here, it's going into the wall a little bit. So I gotta adjust that. Looking good. And for this top section, since there's so much going on down here, I am going to go through from the outside. I'm going to leave this one in place. I'm just going to make it a little bigger. And I want to make that as shallow as possible, about 2.5. So yeah, that's all of our holes in place. You want to make sure there aren't any holes on the outside of the model. That's just going to be more work for you. Post-curing, the point of this is to make the post-processing as easy as possible. So now we have to redo the supports. You can see since I blocked this whole spot off here, we don't even need these supports anymore. Don't even need them. So you can just delete all of those. There's a tiny spot here. It can be a little tricky to get your camera positioned right. So with this spot, I'm just going to increase the penetration of this hole a little more. There's a spot here that glitched out and it won't let me delete this. If I was actually printing this out, I would have to restart at this point to get rid of that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep deleting all of these supports. You really have to be careful that you don't accidentally delete the wrong thing here. There's an island here. I have to support that. And I'm just going to make this hole here a little skinnier so I can put a support underneath it. I like to have at least 3 supports if possible whenever I'm supporting stuff. Gonna move that one over there. It's gonna glitch out like crazy. That looks pretty good. Then I'm just gonna run through everything once again. Make sure everything's supported properly. There is a spot up here at the top that got cut off. You can do something like that. I'm not sure why these are turning red. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure why these are turning red. Sometimes they do that. The supports should be fine where they're at. Whenever I'm adding supports, I like to add a few more contact spots. That's why I put these in here. But yeah, that should be good right there. We could even probably move this one over a little bit. So yeah, that supports that little extension there. And like I was saying before, if you want to add more smaller holes for drainage, you can put those on these spots right here. Spots like this. Adjacent to the main hole. I wouldn't add any around this spot because you might have to fill that in. But like you could put one here, here. This entire back section here could be open. I just want to make sure that doesn't mess with my supports. It's looking like that's gonna cut into the support a little more than I'd like, so I'm not gonna put that one in. But we can't put one down here. And that's pretty much it for this one. My biggest concerns with this model were these flares here that I guess kind of go along the back. Since they protrude pretty far out, I just wanted to be able to make sure that I was going to be able to get a light back up in there. And I should be able to feed a light through this hole here, up into this section here. And then the same thing on this one. I should be able to feed it through here and get this spot. The rest of it should be pretty easy to get to. Again, it's going to make it a lot easier to get a light in there with wider holes. These two could easily be 6mm as well. But at this point, we do have enough access holes. There you go, I made them 6. One last thing I do is I look at the underside of the model and I try and decide whether or not I want to add more supports. I think this one looks pretty good. If you're worried, you could definitely add a few more. There's plenty of space for it. Usually with larger models, I will go in and add a few extra medium supports. It's really on a case-by-case basis, whether or not I think it needs it, how many I think it needs, but it doesn't hurt to have extra supports. You know, the worst thing is to have a print failure because it wasn't supported enough. So I like to avoid that when possible. This is the hull for the attack vehicle for the Human Defense Force. So one of the first things I want to point out is that a lot of companies will give you the STL and the LYS file. And you always want to use the LYS file whenever possible, just because you have more options. With the STL, everything is baked in, but with the LYS file, you can go in and you can change things. You can change the supports, the holes, even the internal hollowing. Whereas with the STL file, everything is baked in and you're really limited with what you can do with it. So we're just going to delete that STL file and just trust me when I say that you should never use that file unless you have to. So with this one, we're looking at what's been done here. I see two holes in the bottom here that are coming through the hole. You're just going to have to clean those spots up if you leave them there. So you can go ahead and delete those. The rest of these, they're in good spots, but they're too small. There's only two internal supports here, which are going to be easy to work around. We just need some bigger holes. So we're going to start at the bottom here and use these keys as access holes. You do want to leave a little bit of a lip around the edge here just to kind of help to hold the track in place, which is going to socket into this. That looks pretty good. The nice thing with these is they're all pretty consistent, so you can just use the same hole on all of these nubs. You can also make these holes a lot wider. I'm going to bump that one up to 15, about 15, 16. Same thing with this one. I know this entire edge is going to be covered up, so I can just put holes along that entire edge if I want. Opening it up like this is going to make it so much easier to wash and cure. And then the most obvious spot in the world to me for a hole is right here, where the turret sits. Going to make that nice and wide. 20 millimeters is plenty. And we want to make sure that that's deep enough that it penetrates the whole way through. Looking good. Yeah, these supports are fine. They are supporting two spots there that would need supported, so I'm going to keep them in. There's these little holes down here. Those are fine too. I'm just going to move them up a little bit. Make this one a little bigger. The bulk of this thing has plenty of supports. I'm a little concerned about this area. We want it to get off to a good start, so I'm going to add a few more. Nothing crazy. And yeah, that's about it with this one. You always want to look at the layers one last time to make sure everything's looking good. Make sure there aren't any unsupported areas. And that's looking pretty good. This is the turret for that model. In my opinion, this doesn't even need to be hollowed. If you're really trying to save some resin, you definitely could. I would just widen these holes up on the bottom here so you can get a light in there a little bit easier. This thing's only maybe 12 millimeters thick, and that just doesn't really justify being hollowed to me. It just becomes more of a pain than it's worth, in my opinion. Me personally, I'm just going to delete the hollowing. It's really easy to do that with an LYS file. You just go under hollowing 3D and then just click this little trash can here and it'll just delete it. That is going to use some extra resin and it's going to add some extra weight. So you do want to double check and make sure that it doesn't need more supports. This one, I think it has enough supports. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to bulk up a few of these supports. You can select multiple supports by hitting shift and then I'm just going to turn those to medium supports. A lot of the times if there's already quite a few supports, just making a few of them medium instead of light, that should help hold it in place. If you're worried about it, you could always add some more supports here, but these are pretty dense, so I think it'll be all right. I'll go through the tracks as well for this one. So with this one, you have like kind of a bit of a hook on the inside here, and there's a spot along here that I feel like is going to be kind of tricky to get a light into, especially on the back side here. I don't think my light would fit in there, and I don't really want to put some holes on the underside here because this is the outside of the model and I don't want to have to do any repair work. Again, it's just more work than it's worth. So I took those holes off, and then what I'm going to do with this model is I'm going to delete the internal hollowing, and I'm going to put some holes in the side here. I want to make them just deep enough that they don't quite reach this edge here, leaving about 1 or 2 millimeters here between this edge and the hole. And then we're just going to place those along the tank. Put one there, smaller one here. Got to make sure it doesn't dig into this edge here because that's going to be visible. And you don't want to go right up to the edge. You want to leave yourself some room around the edges here. You want to make sure that the structure of the model stays intact. See here, I accidentally made this one way bigger than it should be, so I gotta bring that back down, go up here. So it's gonna look a little something like that. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. This is just one way to simplify the post-processing for you. Yeah, you're gonna use a little bit of extra resin, but you have the peace of mind of knowing that this is fully cured. You could add more holes if you want, if you really want to try and save some resin. You could add a couple more, and then just make sure that it's not poking through the other side anywhere. See right here, that's poking through. So I'm gonna decrease the penetration a little bit. This one's pretty close. Gonna take that down to 9. That's looking good. There you go. The nice thing about this technique is you don't even have to use an analyte. Running this through a curing machine should be good enough. But once again, that did add a lot of weight, so you want to make sure you add some more supports. I'm just going to grab a couple of these, a nice even spread, and turn them into medium supports. And I am going to add a few more. If I see a really long individual support here like this, I'll just add a second or third branch to it. Just like that. And that's that. Next, we're going to look at the Great Screecher from their Shadow Stalker line. Personally, I really don't think that this model should have been hollowed. So if you look at the inside of this thing, you can see that it's kind of like a hook shape. There's a decent sized chamber at the base, and then it gets really skinny right here at like the midsection, and then gets wider up towards the head. So you would have to be able to fit a light up through one of these tiny holes and somehow curve it like 90 degrees and jam it up through this really tight passageway here all the way up into the head. And this passageway here at the smallest point, it's I would guess that this is maybe like about 4 millimeters wide, which is not enough space to be able to get a light up in there. And again, the most important thing you want to ask yourself is, how am I going to get a light into this model to cure it? Fortunately, with this model, you can just go to the Hollowing 3D and delete the internal hollowing. You could leave the 2 drain holes in on the bottom here, but there's really no point in doing that, so I'm just going to delete them. Then I just want to scroll through and make sure there aren't any cavities or anything in this model. Make sure everything's supported. I know there are a lot of tools that kind of help you to identify this stuff, but I personally I find it just as easy just to scroll through and actually look at it. I know my eyes aren't going to deceive me, whereas an AI algorithm definitely could. And as good as this software is, I don't think it's ever going to be that good that it's going to be able to completely avoid any issues. I think there's always going to be a certain amount of tweaking you're going to have to do to these. Other than that, the supports look pretty good. I think there's enough there to support the thing. It's got quite a few. So, good to print. Save yourself the headache. Don't hollow this kind of stuff. It's really not that big of a model. This is an Exutar model from Station Forge. So this model is about the size of a marble, pretty small, and it's still hollowed. These holes are about 2 millimeters wide. There's one there, one at the neck hole, one there. There's a slightly larger one on the bottom, but none of these holes are large enough to get a light into. And honestly, they're so small. If you do water washing, the surface tension is going to keep the water from going in and out of these holes. And there are so many internal supports that it's going to make it really difficult to get a good full cure on the inside of this thing. So this is a pretty good candidate for just not even hollowing. This is an OBJ model. Fortunately, they do provide the non-hollowed version of this For something like this, I would definitely suggest using that. It's just way too small to justify hollowing. Save yourself the headache. It's going to cost you an extra 5 cents. You're not going to have to worry about uncured resin leaking out 6 months down the road. I don't really have a lot of examples to show you of stuff that isn't supported. Pretty much all the files that I have are supported. I think it's become pretty standard at this point, at least in the wargaming community. Here's an example of a model that wasn't pre-supported or hollowed. This is part of the Junk Fort Ramparts set from Printable Terrain. Just a quick scroll through this model will show you that there are a lot of internal cavities in this model. And stuff like this, you would have to do so much cleanup work to fix this file to get it to the point where you can resin print it that it's not even worth resin printing. Stuff like this, you just want to use an FDM printer for. There's just way too many cavities in this thing. I also wanted to show you that in the free version of Lychee Slicer, there is the option to do 2D hollowing. That generates this sort of lattice pattern on the inside of the model. I also wouldn't really suggest using this. It's pretty much going to be impossible to fully cure something like that. You could bump the infill down to maybe 10% and be okay, but anything over that, in my opinion, is just too much. Yeah, personally, I try and avoid using 2D hollowing, but it is nice to have the option to use it on the rare occasion that it's useful. To finish this video off, I wanted to show you guys a few models that I've actually printed out and just go through the motions of how I would cure these. Here's some treads with just some holes in the side here. No need to break out the snake light for this one. This is how I did my center hole piece. For something like this, I'll usually spend like 5 to 10 minutes curing the inside. Just for the sake of time, I'm just kind of speeding through it. You can kind of see where the light is on the inside there. It kind of gives you an idea. You can really see how it helps to have larger holes. You can really see here where that concentrated beam is hitting that sweet spot that I was talking about earlier in the video. This is the body of a Tactical Titan that I just printed out. Same deal here, I just widened the holes as much as I could around the arms, leg joints, and the neck. And you can see that it's still going to be a challenge to really get a full cure on the inside with this one, just because of the limitations of the snake light. That's why it's really important to make sure that you have those access holes in the spots that you need them. If you just don't feel like you're going to be able to get the light in every spot, you just might have to print it out solid. Sometimes I'll use like a rolling technique to kind of spin the light around. With most of my prints, what I'll do is after curing them, I'll let them sit out by a window where they can get indirect sunlight for about a day or two. And then I'll smell them, and if they still have a really strong resin smell, then I'll go back and I'll do some more curing on the inside here, and maybe I'll add some water to the inside to kind of help with reflectivity, and just kind of help that light to get in all the nooks and crannies, just try and get every spot cured and not have to worry about this thing off-gassing or leaking uncured resin. And that usually works. I haven't really had any issues with resin leaking out of models and cracking. I've been pretty good with that just because I've been so diligent and just really made sure that everything was right at every point in the process. Here's the body and tail for that Alien Hives artillery beast I did earlier. Something like this is really easy to cure on the inside because it's got a nice curve on it. It's not just like a 90-degree angle. When I'm curing hollowed models, I'll put them in my curing machine for 1 minute, flip them, cure for another minute, and then I'll just set them on my window, let them dry out a little bit, and then I go in with the snake light. That's what I'm doing right now. So I'll start off at the tip of one of the holes and just kind of spin around here, and then just slowly go further and further into the tail. Same thing with these smaller drain holes. You want to make sure that each section is cured before you move on to the next section. Helps to turn the light out so you can see it a little better. You can see the bulb is right here. And you could even just leave that in there for like a few minutes if you want. Same thing with the body. You can really get an idea of how small these holes actually are. Sometimes they look a lot bigger on the computer, and then when you actually print them out, you realize how small they actually are. You want to make sure you get into all those corner spots, all the hard to reach places. See, I'm having a hard time getting up into these two parts here, so I'm going to have to go in with a Dremel, and I'm going to have to widen this hole up. I make sure to cure as much as I can before using a Dremel, and you also want to make sure that you're wearing a mask, eye protection, have something laid out like this, a work area, because you don't want to breathe in that resin dust. You want to be able to throw it away. I'll just show you here what I'm going to do. Okay. Sometimes that's what you got to do to be able to get back into those spots that are difficult to reach if you miscalculated while you were hollowing. There we go. You can see the lights back in there. If I sound weird, it's because I have a respirator around my throat. If you're using a Dremel, it helps to keep it on a lower setting. I have mine around 8,000. If you go too fast, it starts to really cause a lot of dust to go airborne. 8,000 to 10,000 to me, I think that's a pretty good speed. I'm just going to set this on my windowsill for a day or two and let it fully dry and make sure that there's no more odor coming from it. Then we'll be good to go. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. I'm sure I missed some things. If you have any extra tips or you want to correct me or you have your own opinion about certain things, go ahead and put them in the comments. And yeah, hopefully I did a pretty good job explaining this process. Thank you for watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe. A big thank you to my patrons. I actually ended up doing this video because I had a patron asking me how I did my hollowing. It's a topic that I've kind of been wanting to do a video on for a while, so I thought that's probably a good time. So thanks for the suggestion. If you want to help support this channel, Patreon membership is a great way to do that. You can watch my videos ad-free and access any add-ons that I offer. Hopefully this video helped clear some things up for you. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.